Welcome to Book Club for December.
This month, the books that we read were The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald
and Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse. So, what's The Great Gatsby about?
Well, F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby is a tragic love story about business tycoon Jay Gatsby and his failed pursuit of the American dream in the post-World War I era of the Roaring Twenties. What was Siddhartha about?
Hermann Hesse's Siddhartha is about a man's spiritual journey during the age of the Buddha and his path to self-discovery throughout his lifetime.
Well, what I noticed that these books were very different in plot. Well, one was a spiritual journey and the other one was a love affair. But I did notice there was a common theme between both. I noticed that those who try to detach themselves from their identity cannot attain satisfaction and happiness.
In your opinion, how was this incorporated in The Great Gatsby?
Well, The Great Gatsby is set after World War I, in which everyone was pursuing the American dream, in which they envisioned that anyone could become successful in all aspects of life, if only they worked hard enough. Gatsby embodied this idea completely, having grown up poor, then later striking it rich. But as he became ever the businessman, engaged in a life of luxury, he refused to acknowledge his less fortunate times. What about in Siddhartha?
Siddhartha grows up with the Hindu religion and culture, but does not identify with it like his family does. A childhood of riches and familial love makes him dissatisfied with his lifestyle, for he seeks something more. He seeks a spiritual awakening that will provide him with his true identity. Considering himself ignorant during his childhood, he does not want to acknowledge anything associated with his youth throughout his life, even with his family, because he fears it'll interfere with his spiritual awakening. So, what's an example of this theme in The Great Gatsby?
Well, there's a very specific scene in The Great Gatsby in which Nick and Gatsby engage in a conversation regarding Gatsby's past, where it is uncovered that Gatsby was once poor, but he completely despised that state of poverty, and because of this, he refused to regard his parents with respect, believing that they had caused his downfall due to the lack of money they held. Fitzgerald even includes that his parents were shiftless and unsuccessful farm people. His imagination had never really accepted them as his parents at all. And Gatsby never tells of these situations to Nick, but only chooses to brag of his triumphs, even stating, "I lived like a young Raja in all the capitals of Europe, Paris, Venice, Rome, collecting jewels, chiefly rubies, hunting big game." It becomes evident that some of these accomplishments were simply lies. Fitzgerald demonstrates that Gatsby is a persona, and that the man once known as James Gatz is buried within. Gatsby has created himself a persona to impress Daisy, and in doing so, he ignores his past, believing it flaws him.
Is there another example continuing from the relationship between Gatsby and Daisy?
Yes, actually there is. Throughout the novel, we learn that Gatsby has come back to reunite with his former love, Daisy. And once he successfully reunites with her, she becomes charmed and impressed by him. But Daisy represents lavishness, wealth, and materialism. There is a very specific situation in which she sees Gatsby's extensive closet and cries over the amount of clothing he has, stating that, "It makes me sad because I've never seen such beautiful shirts before." As she distanced herself away from Gatsby due to his lack of fortune previously, she now wants to become interested in him again upon hearing of his wealthy status. In the end, everything Gatsby does is for Daisy, to get her love. Because of this determination, he detaches himself from his true identity. Because of his pursuit of Daisy, whom he sees as his American dream, he only wants to be seen as successful and thus mocks his past. What about in Siddhartha? Is there an example of this theme?
Yes, Siddhartha lived a youth of luxury, fully encompassed with riches and the unconditional love of his family. Since this lifestyle did not satisfy him, he was unhappy and embarked on a spiritual quest in order to seek enlightenment. He left his family behind, thinking he would be better off. At the time, he did not realize that disconnecting from his past would leave him more lost. Instead, he believed that his past was holding him back from his true identity. This belief led to a life of wandering in an attempt to attain nirvana. He isolated himself because of his belief that one must find the source within one's own self. Everything else was seeking a detour. He was very stubborn in his pursuits because he firmly believed that who he was before was not his true identity.
And how does this theme continue throughout Siddhartha's journey?
On his journey to enlightenment, Siddhartha came across many individuals and groups. Some were on a spiritual journey like him, while others were not. He interacted with these different people and went to many extremes, thinking that this was the way he would reach his goal and find his true identity. First, he joined the Samanas and left behind all worldly pleasures. Many years of living under their strict conditions did not lead him to his goal. Once he left the Samanas, he traveled to meet the Buddha. Even here, he did not attain his goal and left to try something else. He came across a town where he would eventually stay for many years until he grew old. Here he met a woman named Kamala who slowly shifted his attention away from his journey. Like his other endeavors, Siddhartha lived this lifestyle to an extreme and became engrossed in the pleasures of wealth. One day, he had the realization that this lifestyle had left him with nothing of importance because it did not contribute to his pursuit of enlightenment. Shortly after, he left the town and ended up at the river which took him there initially. He chose to stay here with the ferryman who showed him a unique kindness. He realized that this man had attained the nirvana that he sought. During his stay, Kamala and her son made their way to the river. Upon Kamala's death, the son stayed with Siddhartha and the ferryman. Siddhartha was adamant that the boy should stay with him despite being used to a luxurious lifestyle. The more he thought about it, he realized that he had never fully lost himself in another person to such an extent as to forget himself. He had never been able to do this, and it had then seemed to him that this was the biggest difference between him and the ordinary people. Siddhartha had many ideas about what differentiated him and the ordinary people. One by one, each proved to be false because one who experiences an awakening does not accomplish it by breaking ties with normal things. After realizing this, Siddhartha let the boy go and focused on enlightenment. Eventually, he attained it and felt that he possessed his true identity. He would not have been able to attain this and be satisfied if he continued to detach himself from the world like he did before.
And do you have any concluding thoughts?
Yes. Well, but since both Gatsby and Siddhartha wanted to disregard their past and detach themselves from their previous identity, believing it was not truly them, this meant refusing to acknowledge their childhoods. For Gatsby, that meant refusing to acknowledge his poverty-filled childhood. For Siddhartha, that meant considering his youth to have been filled with ignorance and that his past was not representative of his character. It meant refusing to acknowledge his family's love for him so that he could embark on his own journey and find his identity.
But in the end, when both characters are nearing their demise, they come to realize that there is no life without the good and bad parts of it. Their lives were not always perfect, but it was the good and bad parts of it that made them who they were. And only when one realizes that their flaws are part of their identity is when they can truly be satisfied with themselves and attain happiness.
Thank you for tuning in to the book club this month. See you in January.